All right, so today we're diving into something pretty fascinating, the Indian real estate market. And more specifically, this whole surge in investment we're seeing from NRIs. It's gotten to the point where they're making up a significant chunk of sales for some of the big developers, like almost a quarter. It's wild.
Yeah, it's a real trend, not just a blip on the radar, and figuring out the why behind it is super interesting.
Absolutely, and that's what we're here to do. We've got a few articles we're looking at today, one from the Economic Times, another from the Times of India, and some expert commentary on what's happening, particularly in Gurgaon, which seems to be the place to be right now.
And it's not just about buying any property, they're going for the high-end stuff, luxury apartments, villas, you name it.
Right. It's like they're bringing this whole international lifestyle expectation back home with them. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's back up a bit. The Economic Times article mentioned that before the pandemic, NRIs made up maybe 10% of sales, and now it's like 25% for some developers. What's your take on what's driving this surge?
Well, there's a few things at play. There's always that emotional connection, right? That desire to have a piece of home, a place of your own, especially if you've been living abroad. But let's be real, the financials matter a lot too. The Economic Times specifically called out how strong the dollar and the pound are against the rupee. So for NRIs, it's like their money goes further.
Makes sense. It's like invest while the getting's good, but in this case, it's more like invest while the rupee is, well, you get the idea. But it's not just the exchange rate, right? India's economy seems to be doing all right compared to the rest of the world.
Exactly. The Economic Times article highlighted how well India's GDP is doing, especially compared to other more developed countries. That kind of stability is really attractive to investors, especially when everything else feels so shaky right now.
So it's like a double whammy, good exchange rate, and a stable economy. No wonder they're seeing India as a safe bet.
And you can't forget the bigger picture. Globally, things are a bit uncertain right now, and investors, they look for places they feel safe putting their money. India, with its growing economy and democratic foundation, well, it's looking pretty good on that front.
It's like that old saying, when in doubt, invest in bricks and mortar. But here's the thing, it's not just any bricks and mortar they're after. The Times of India article pointed out that some cities are way more popular than others. And you know what? It's not the usual suspects like Mumbai anymore.
Yeah, there's definitely been a shift. Mumbai's still holding its own, but the NCR region, especially Gurgaon, is seeing a ton of NRI investment. Bengaluru and Hyderabad are also high on the list.
It's funny how last year everyone was talking about Pune and Chennai. So now it's all Gurgaon, Gurgaon, Gurgaon. What's got everyone so hyped about Gurgaon specifically?
A few reasons. These cities, Gurgaon and Bengaluru especially, they're big IT hubs. So you've got a lot of younger NRIs who are comfortable in that kind of environment. Plus, they're seeing a lot of development, new highways, metro lines, modern airports. It just feels like a city on the rise.
And let's not forget those luxury properties they're building, specifically with NRIs in mind. I mean, one of the articles even mentioned golf courses. It's clearly not just about finding a place to live, it's about a whole lifestyle, right?
Absolutely. Gurgaon, in particular, has cultivated this image of a mini global city, and it's very intentional. International schools, high-end shopping malls, those golf courses you mentioned, it's all about catering to a very specific, very globalized way of life.
So they're basically bringing the best of what they've seen abroad back home and creating these pockets of like luxury and convenience. And I have to admit, from an investment standpoint, it's pretty smart. But what does all of this mean for the Indian real estate market as a whole? That's what I'm really wondering.
It is the million-dollar question, right? I mean, you've got all this investment. It's breathing new life into the real estate sector, fueling growth, pushing development, creating this more, I don't know, dynamic and globally connected market. But you always have to look at both sides of the coin.
Right. There's always a but. What are we missing here? What are the downsides?
Well, we talked about how this demand is pushing prices up, which is great if you already own property. But for local residents, especially those who are trying to buy for the first time, it can be a real challenge. Like, how do they afford to even enter the market at this point? It's like trying to balance this growth with, I don't know, sustainable living for everyone.
It's a tough one, for sure. But let's talk about Gurgaon a little more, since it seems to be the current favorite. One of the things that stood out was this phrase, mini global city, which sounds pretty appealing. What exactly creates that kind of vibe? Like, you've probably experienced it yourself, how some cities just have this different energy. What is it about Gurgaon?
Gurgaon's transformation is actually pretty remarkable. I mean, if you think about it, a few decades ago, it was a nothing, basically a suburb of Delhi. And now it's like this cosmopolitan hub.
The article called it a complete package. They talked about the infrastructure, the economic opportunities. What does that actually look like? What makes it so complete?
Well, it's incredibly well connected, for one. You've got the Indira Gandhi International Airport right there, multiple expressways that link it to Delhi and other major cities, and the metro system is growing so fast. I think that's a big deal for NRIs, that ease of getting around, because they're used to that kind of seamless travel.
It's like they skipped that whole developing city phase and went straight to world class.
Yeah, in a lot of ways they did. And it's not just the transportation, it's the quality of life. You've got your pick of housing, from those luxury villas to high-rise apartments, all with modern amenities. Then there are international schools, great health care, the food scene is amazing, all kinds of different cuisines.
And the shopping. Can't forget about that.
Yeah.
Luxury brands, local designers. What's it like navigating that retail scene?
It's really diverse, something for everyone, whether you're on a budget or looking for high-end stuff. But it's not all material, you know. Gurgaon also has this really thriving cultural scene, art galleries, performance spaces, always something going on.
Sounds vibrant. But what about the economic engine driving all of this? It's the IT sector, right?
Absolutely. Gurgaon is a major hub for all things IT. Some of the biggest names in tech are based there. And that attracts a very specific kind of workforce, highly skilled, a lot of them returning NRIs, bringing back their global experience, and of course, their spending power.
It's a win-win for their economy then, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. A win-win. It creates this positive feedback loop, you know? NRIs invest, which attracts other investors, more development happens, more jobs, and the economy just keeps growing.
But even with all of that, there have to be challenges. What are some of the potential downsides to this kind of rapid growth, especially in a place like Gurgaon?
Well, as we mentioned before, all this development usually means higher prices, especially when it comes to housing. And that can be really tough on people who live there, especially if they're trying to buy their first home. It's like this gap is forming between those who are benefiting from the boom and those who are just struggling to keep up.
It's about finding that balance, fostering economic growth without leaving people behind.
Definitely. And that's something city planners and policymakers really need to be on top of. But Gurgaon isn't the only city attracting this NRI investment. The Times of India article also mentioned Hyderabad and Bengaluru. What are we seeing in those cities?
Yeah, I was curious about those too. They both seem to have some similarities to Gurgaon in terms of what they offer NRIs. Strong economies, good infrastructure, that cosmopolitan feel. What do you think? What makes them stand out?
Well, Hyderabad, or the City of Pearls as it's sometimes called, has this incredibly rich history going back centuries. It was the seat of the Nizams, you know? And you can still see that history in the architecture, the culture. It's really interesting how it all blends together with the modern cityscape.
It's like this mix of old and new, all woven together. What's it like experiencing that?
They've done a really good job of preserving their heritage while still modernizing. So you have a thriving IT sector, great healthcare, more and more international schools, which appeals to those NRIs who want the best of both worlds.
And what about Bengaluru? It's always been known as India's Garden City, right? Is that still true?
Oh, yeah. Bengaluru is definitely known for its green spaces and its nice weather. It used to be a place where people went to retire, but now it's this bustling city full of startups and big tech companies. And it's attracting this whole new generation who want those opportunities, but also a bit of a more relaxed vibe compared to, say, Gurgaon.
So it's like a more laid-back alternative, but with those same incredible opportunities.
Exactly. Bengaluru definitely has a more easygoing feel, which some NRIs really like. Plus, it's got a big cultural scene, lots of art galleries, music venues, theaters, that kind of thing.
So both cities offer this unique blend of opportunity and lifestyle, which makes sense why NRIs are so drawn to them.
And remember, these cities are not standing still. They're always changing, adapting to new trends. And this whole influx of NRI investment, that's just one piece of the puzzle.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over the next few years. But let's bring it back to our listeners for a moment. What does all of this mean for them? Whether they're thinking about investing or just interested in what's happening in the world, what are the key takeaways?
That's a really important question. Because these real estate trends, they're not just about property, right? They're a sign of bigger things, economic shifts, global investment patterns, even India's growing importance on a global scale.
So even if you're not an NRI planning to buy that luxury apartment, it's still something to pay attention to.
Absolutely. For one, it has a direct impact on the overall economy. When the real estate market is doing well, other industries benefit too: construction, materials, finance. And that can lead to more jobs, more growth on a larger scale.
And for the people who already live in these cities, what should they be aware of as this trend continues?
Well, as we've been discussing, more investment and more demand for housing often leads to higher prices. And that can make it difficult for people to afford to live there, especially those who are trying to buy their first home.
It really makes you think about the long game, you know? But this whole conversation, it's got me thinking about the bigger picture, like the social side of things. We talked about all these NRIs coming in, driving all this growth. But what about the people who already live there? It's great that these cities are becoming more global, but is it happening in a way that works for everyone? Like, is it sustainable, inclusive? What are your thoughts?
That is such an important point, and honestly, it doesn't get talked about enough. Yes, it's exciting to see all this development, but we have to ask ourselves, who is it really for? And what are we giving up to get it? Are we just repeating the same mistakes other places have made, where only a few people actually benefit? Or can we do it differently? Can we use this investment to create cities that are, I don't know, more equitable, more just?
Finding that balance between progress and making sure everyone has a chance to thrive, it's not easy.
Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen to make sure these booming cities are inclusive?
It's going to take a lot of effort on multiple fronts. For starters, city planners, they have to prioritize affordable housing, make sure that the people who have always lived there aren't pushed out because they can't afford it anymore. And sustainable development, that has to be a priority too. Preserving green spaces, creating a city that's livable for everyone, not just those who can afford luxury apartments. And honestly, none of this can happen without involving the local communities. They need to have a say in what happens to their cities.
Creating a city that works for everyone, not just a select few. It's about making sure that everyone benefits from this growth, not just the privileged few.
Exactly. It's a shift in how we think about progress. It's not just about the economy, it's about the social impact, the environmental impact, building cities that are successful, yes, but also just successful and sustainable.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. This is just the tip of the iceberg, really. We always encourage you to do your own research, ask your own questions, come to your own conclusions. Because what's happening in India right now, it's shaping the future of these cities. And understanding these trends can help you make better decisions, whether it's about investing or just understanding the world around you.
It's a conversation that needs to keep happening if we want to see a future where everyone benefits from India's growth.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.